I remember telling Emily, I think we finally figured life out. And she smiled like she always did, soft and warm. She said, you say that every time you feel calm. I laughed, because it's true every time I'm with you. She squeezed my hand. You're impossible. I said, you love that about me. She nodded. I do. I believed my life was stable because she was in it. Every plan had her name inside it. Every fear felt smaller when I spoke it out loud to her. I asked, what do you want for the future? She said, I want peace. I replied, then we already have it. She didn't answer. I didn't notice the silence. That morning I told her, I trust you more than anyone. She looked at me and said, you shouldn't say things like that so easily. I smiled. Why not? She looked away. Because life changes. I said, not us. Later that day she texted me, can we meet tonight? I typed, of course, everything okay? 3 dots appeared, then stopped. Yeah, I just want to talk. We met at the cafe where we planned trips we never took. I waved. She didn't wave back. I asked, why do you look so serious? She sat down slowly. I need to say something. I joked, that sounds scary. She didn't smile. She said, I think we should move on. I laughed once, sharp and confused. Move on from what? She replied, from us. I leaned forward. Emily, this isn't funny. She said, I'm not joking. I asked, did I do something wrong? She shook her head. No. Then help me understand. She stared at the table. I just don't feel the same. I said, since when? She answered too fast. For a while? I felt my chest tighten. Why didn't you tell me? She said, I didn't want to hurt you. I whispered, you're hurting me now. She sighed. This is better in the long run. I said, for who? She didn't reply. I reached for her hand. She pulled back. I said, you ain't look at me. She didn't. I asked, is there someone else? She said, that doesn't matter. I replied, it matters to me. She finally looked up. Her eyes were dry. She said, please don't make this harder. I laughed again, broken this time. Harder? Emily, you're ending my world. She stood up. I'm sorry. I said, you don't sound sorry. She paused. I am, just tired. I asked, tired of me? She whispered, I don't know. People around us talked and laughed. I felt invisible. I said, say you'll try. She shook her head. I can't. Say you still love me. She closed her eyes. I can't. She picked up her bag. I stood too fast. Don't walk away like this. She said, goodbye. I watched her turn. She didn't look back. I sat down slowly. My hands were shaking. I told myself, she'll text. She always does. My phone stayed silent. That was the moment I understood. Something inside me didn't just crack. It fell apart. I didn't sleep after Emily left. I kept staring at my phone, whispering, say something. Just say something. Silence answered me every time. I told myself, she's confused, she'll come back. Then another voice said, she already left. Laura called me. I said, I'm fine. She replied, you sound empty. I snapped, I said I'm fine. She went quiet. I'll come by tomorrow. Don't, I said. I need space. She sighed. You always say that when you're breaking. That night, I replayed every word Emily said. I asked the ceiling, when did you stop loving me? No answer came. I blamed myself. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I trusted too hard. I laughed alone. Maybe love is just a stupid habit. 3 days later, I went out just to breathe. I told myself, don't think, just walk. My phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. Hey man, you okay? I typed, yeah. I didn't mean it. I turned the corner near the bookstore. I heard laughter, her laughter. I froze. Emily stood there. Ryan stood beside her. She laughed the way she used to laugh with me, head tilted, eyes bright. I said out loud, "No." Neither of them heard me. I stepped closer. I said, "Emily?" She turned pale. Ryan's smile vanished. I asked, "What is this?" Emily opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Ryan said, "Bro, I can explain." I laughed. "You already did." I looked at Ryan. "How long?" He stared at the ground. I shouted, "How long?" He whispered, "It just happened." I said, "You're lying." Emily said my name softly. I snapped, "Don't." She flinched. I asked her, "Was this why you left?" She looked at Ryan. That was the answer. I said, "You couldn't even tell me the truth?" She whispered, "I didn't know how." I replied, "So you chose him." Ryan tried to speak. "I never meant to hurt you." I stepped back. "You already did." I asked him, "Were you laughing about me too?" He shook his head fast. I said, "Then why can't you look at me?" People stared. I didn't care. I said, "You were my friend." Ryan whispered, "I know." I replied, "No, you don't." Emily finally spoke. "I thought you'd move on." I laughed, sharp and loud. "Move on to what?" She said nothing. I felt something collapse inside me. I said, "Both of you disappear." Ryan hesitated. Emily didn't. She walked away. Ryan followed. I stayed frozen. My chest burned. I whispered, "So this is the truth." I pulled out my phone. I typed to Ryan, "Delete my number." No reply came. I typed to Emily, "You killed something real." The message stayed unread. I sat on the curb and laughed again. I said, "I trusted the wrong people." The street didn't argue. I understood then. I didn't just lose a girlfriend. I lost trust, memory, and safety. Love betrayed me. Friendship stabbed me. And the worst part was knowing they chose each other while I was still choosing them. I whispered, "This is where the old me ends." The silence agreed. I didn't know who I would become after tonight, but I knew one thing clearly and painfully true inside my chest. I would never beg again for love that chose to walk away from me so easily ever. I stopped answering my phone. I let it ring until silence felt normal. I told myself no one can fix this. The fridge stayed full. My stomach stayed empty. I whispered, "You don't deserve comfort." Laura showed up anyway. She knocked hard. "Open the door." I said, "Go away." She replied, "I'm not asking." I opened it slowly. She looked at me like I was already gone. She said, "When was the last time you ate?" I shrugged. "Food feels pointless." She snapped, "So does breathing, but you still do it." I laughed weakly. "Barely." She walked in. "You smell like sadness." I said, "That's my new identity." She crossed her arms. "Don't joke." I asked, "What else is left?" She looked around. "You haven't cleaned." I said, "Nothing here deserves effort." She said, "You do." I looked away. "Not anymore." She sat across from me. "Talk." I said, "There's nothing to say." She said, "That's a lie." I whispered, "They chose each other." Laura closed her eyes. "I know." I asked, "Am I that easy to replace?" She shook her head. "This isn't about your worth." I laughed. "It feels like it is." I said, "Maybe I wasn't enough." She snapped, "Stop blaming yourself." I replied, "Men who get left always hear that." She said, "Real men feel pain." I muttered, "Then why do I feel weak?" She leaned forward. "Who taught you that pain equals weakness?" I didn't answer. She said softly, "You loved honestly. That's strength." I whispered, "It feels like stupidity." That night, voices followed me outside. Someone said, "That's him." Another replied, "Poor guy." I clenched my fists. "Don't look at me." I walked past the cafe. A voice laughed inside. Someone said, "Emily and Ryan seem happy." I kept walking faster. My chest burned. "Make it stop." Back home, Laura said, "You can't hide forever." I asked, "What if I want to?" She said, "Then you'll disappear." I whispered, "Maybe that's easier." She stood up. "Listen to me." I looked at her. She said, "Rock bottom has a sound." I asked, "What does it sound like?" She replied, "Silence after you give up." I swallowed. "I hear it." She said, "Then fight it." I shook my head. "I don't know how." She said, "You don't need a plan, you need a choice." I asked, "What choice?" She answered, "Drown or change." I laughed bitterly. "Change into what?" She said, "Someone who survives." She hugged me. I didn't move. She whispered, "You're still here." I breathed in slowly. My voice cracked. "I don't want to feel like this anymore." She said, "Then don't stay here." I asked, "Will it hurt less?" She replied, "No, but it will mean something." After she left, I sat alone. I told myself, "This pain is teaching you." I didn't know the lesson yet, but I understood the warning. I could let this destroy me, or I could let it change me. I wasn't strong. I wasn't healed. But for the first time since she left, I chose not to disappear. I stopped asking why. That was the first change. I told myself, explanations won't heal you. The silence didn't answer, but it didn't hurt as much anymore. Laura said, "You're running." I replied, "No, I'm choosing distance." She asked, "From them or from yourself?" I said, "From pain." The new city smelled unfamiliar. I liked that. I whispered, "No memories live here." My phone stayed quiet. I let it. On my first day at work, Mark sat beside me. He said, "You're new." I replied, "Unfortunately." He smiled. "That means you're still becoming." We had coffee. He asked, "Why do you look tired?" I said, "Life." He nodded. Life usually means loss. I didn't argue. Weeks passed. Mark said, "You work too late." I replied, "It keeps my mind busy." He asked, "From what?" I said, "From people who left." He didn't pity me. I noticed that. He said, "Pain isn't special." I frowned. "It feels personal." He replied, "It always does." At the gym, my body shook before my mind did. I told myself, lift, breathe, repeat. Sweat replaced tears. Silence replaced begging. Mark asked one evening, "Do you hate them?" I said, "Some days." He said, "Good. Hate means you're still alive." I asked, "What comes after?" He replied, "Control." I stopped checking social media. I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped bleeding in public. One night, Mark said, "You don't talk about her anymore." I replied, "I talk to myself now." He nodded. "That's progress." I told him, "I don't forgive." He said, "You don't have to." I asked, "Then what do I do?" He said, "Build something that doesn't need them." I stood in my apartment, bare walls, quiet air. I said, "This is mine." No one argued. The mirror showed a man thinner, calmer, quieter. I whispered, "You survived?" My reflection didn't smile, but it stayed. I thought of Emily once that week. I didn't ache, I just remembered. Mark said, "You've changed." I replied, "I learned." He asked, "Grandma, what?" I said, "Yeah, chasing answers keeps you stuck." He raised his cup. "To distance." I lifted mine. "To choosing myself." That night I lay in bed without noise. I told myself, this pain is fuel. I didn't feel strong. I felt steady. I wasn't healed. I wasn't forgiving. But I wasn't begging anymore. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt in control of my next step. Time passed without asking me for permission. Mark said, "You're doing well." I replied, I'm doing something. He smiled. That's more than surviving. Work started trusting me. My boss said, we need you on this project. I answered, I won't disappoint. Inside, I thought, I already know how that feels. One evening, a woman sat across from me at a work dinner. She said, you're very quiet. I replied, I listen more now. She smiled. I'm Sophia. I said, I'm glad to meet you. She asked, are you always this guarded? I laughed lightly. Only when it matters. She didn't push. I noticed that. We talked again days later. She said, you don't talk about your past. I replied, it talks enough without me. She nodded. That sounds heavy. I said, it is. She asked, are you afraid of getting close? I paused. I'm afraid of forgetting myself. She said, that's honest. I didn't know how to feel about that. Mark noticed. He said, you smile differently lately. I replied, don't read into it. He said, I'm not warning you, I'm observing. Sophia said, you don't need to impress me. I answered, I'm not trying to. She replied, good. Then stay. One night Laura called. She said, have you heard about Emily? I said, no. She hesitated. Things aren't good. I replied, they never are. Laura continued, Ryan left her. I closed my eyes. I don't care. She said, you sound like you do. I replied, I sound tired. Rumors followed anyway. Someone at work said, your ex looks rough. I answered, she's not my story anymore. They nodded, confused. Sophia asked me, does hearing her name still hurt? I said, it feels distant. She asked, is that better? I replied, it's safer. I watched success grow around me. Compliments came easily. Sleep came harder. Mark said, winning doesn't mean healed. I asked, then what does it mean? He said, it reveals what you're avoiding. Sophia said softly, you don't let people in fully. I replied, I let them stay near. She smiled sadly. That's not the same. I looked at my reflection again. The scars were quiet, not gone. I whispered, you're functioning. Sophia touched my hand once. I pulled back without meaning to. She said, I won't chase you. I nodded. Thank you. That night I thought of Emily, not with anger, not with longing, just distance. I realized something heavy. I survived betrayal by building walls. They protected me. They also kept me alone. I said out loud, success didn't fix me. The room stayed silent, but it felt honest. I was stronger. I was respected. I was admired. Yet inside, I stood still, winning on the outside, uncertain on the inside. The charity hall smelled of antiseptic and perfume. I didn't like it. I told myself, keep moving. Then I saw her, Emily. She looked tired. The brightness in her eyes was muted, and lines had settled where smiles used to live. I muttered under my breath, of course it's her. She noticed me at the same moment. Her lips parted. She didn't speak. I said first, Emily? She whispered, hi. I asked, how are you? She hesitated. I'm okay. I scanned the crowd, pretending not to study her. I said, you look different. She said softly, time does that. I replied, yeah, it does. There was a long silence. I asked, why now? Why this event? She shrugged. I volunteer sometimes. I muttered, right. She looked down. I said, you're alone. She said, not really. I asked, then why come here? She smiled faintly. To see people I knew. I replied, some people never forget. The awkwardness pressed in. I said, Emily, I heard you're... She interrupted, please don't. Not here. I stopped. Right, sorry. We moved to a quieter corner. She said, I wanted to apologize. I asked, for everything? She whispered, I didn't handle things. Well, I replied, that's one way to put it. She looked away. I know words aren't enough. I said, yeah, they're not. We were silent again. I felt the old ache, but controlled it. I said, you look like you've carried a lot. She smiled weakly. And you? I said, I carry differently now. She nodded. I can tell. The room faded around me. I wasn't sure if it was the music or the memory. I asked, do you ever regret? She whispered, every day. I replied, funny? So do I. She reached for my hand. I froze. I didn't move. My heart thudded. I could feel every year, every memory, every betrayal in that instant. I whispered, Emily. She looked at me. I didn't mean for it to hurt this much. I said nothing. My mind spun. Anger, longing, confusion, memory. I asked, why now? She said softly, because I needed to see you. I said, you didn't then. Why now? She didn't answer. I noticed the small tremble in her fingers as they brushed mine. I whispered, this doesn't undo anything. She said, I know. I replied, then why? She shrugged. Because I hoped. I didn't finish for her. We stayed like that for a moment. I realized I wasn't aching anymore the same way. I told her, I've changed. She said, I can see that. I asked quietly, do you hate me? She shook her head. No, I'm sorry I caused you pain. I replied, sorry doesn't bring back trust. She whispered, I know. The hall buzzed with laughter and chatter around us. I said, Emily, it's strange in seeing you like this. She said, it's strange for me too. I laughed lightly. We're ghosts here, aren't we? She smiled faintly. Maybe. I pulled my hand back slowly. She whispered, I just wanted you to feel me here. Once more. I nodded. I felt it. She said, thank you. I realized then, I felt something I hadn't in years, awareness without pain. I said softly, I'm glad we met. She whispered, so am I. We parted with a brief hug. I told myself, that's it. No chasing, no longing, just the echo of what used to be. And for the first time I understood, I had changed more than she could see. Laura called me that morning. She said, Emily finally admitted something. I replied, what now? She said, she wanted you to know the truth. I asked, which truth? She whispered, all of it. Later, Emily messaged me. Can we talk? I typed back, yes. Once. When we met, I said calmly, start talking. She looked at me, hesitant. She whispered, I thought you'd move on quickly. I asked, so you were watching, waiting? She nodded. I thought I'd come back if it didn't work out. I said, you really miscalculated. She said, Ryan left me when things got hard. I asked, did it hurt? She nodded. Everything fell apart. I replied, and you blamed me for leaving? She said softly, I didn't expect you to stay broken. I laughed, low and quiet. Broken? I survived. I asked, friends? Family? She hesitated. I lost most. People stopped calling. I had nothing stable left. I said, I see. She looked down. I wanted you to see me suffer in some way. I replied, suffering is for those who care to measure it. I moved past measuring. I remembered the old nights, the betrayal, the whispered laughs. I asked, Ryan? Did he think it was fair? She shook her head. No. He ran away too. I said, then karma wasn't silent. It just worked slowly. She whispered, I know. I asked, and you thought I'd take you back? She looked at me, regret on her face. I hoped. I said, hoping doesn't undo choices. She whispered, I thought you were weak. I laughed lightly. Weak? You lost sight of who you knew. She said, I never realized. I interrupted. Realizing now doesn't change what's gone. I paused. So why reach out? She said. To apologize. To face what I did. I nodded. Fine. Then you faced it. I asked. Do you want anything else? She whispered. Maybe an closure. I said. Closure doesn't require me. Laura texted me later. She's been crying all week. I typed back. I already knew the cost. She replied, doesn't it bother you? I said, I see clarity. It's enough. I remembered my old nights, empty, screaming at the ceiling. I said softly to myself, karma didn't need my hand. It just moved. Emily said one last time, I never meant it to go this far. I replied, intentions aren't excuses. She looked at me, waiting for judgment, anger, something. I said calmly, you learned. That's your lesson. She whispered, and me? I replied, you survived too. That's all anyone can do. I felt the weight lift, though lightly. I asked, do you hate me? She shook her head. No, I just lost perspective. I said, perspective comes with time and pain. I told her, I forgive because I don't need to hate. She said, that's better than I imagined. I replied, it's simpler than you think. I walked away after that. She didn't follow, I didn't look back. I whispered to myself, the world corrected itself quietly. No yelling, no revenge, just truth. And for the first time I felt power in stillness. The past had no grip on me anymore. Karma had spoken without raising its voice. I said softly, now I decide my own story. Emily called me that morning. Her voice trembled. Can we meet? I said, yes, once. When I arrived, she was waiting outside, hesitant. She whispered, I made a mistake. Can we try again? I looked at her carefully. Try again? She nodded. I can change. I've realized everything. I stayed silent for a moment. I asked, everything? You mean leaving me, betraying trust, lying? She said softly, I know. I regret it all. I replied, regret doesn't erase the past. She reached for my hand. I stepped back. She whispered, please, just one chance. I said calmly, you don't understand what that would mean. She asked, does it matter how much I've grown? I replied, growth after betrayal doesn't undo it. I've changed too. She looked confused. Changed how? I said, I don't beg anymore. I don't fall blindly. I protect myself. She whispered, I never wanted to hurt you. I nodded. Intentions don't erase consequences. She lowered her head. So, this is it? I replied, yes. I can't reopen the past. I can't let it destroy me again. She looked up, tears glistening. I thought, you'd forgive easily. I said, I don't forgive blindly. I don't let anyone reshape me into someone I'm not. She sobbed softly. I whispered, I loved you once. That doesn't vanish. But it doesn't mean I'll suffer for you again. She took a step closer. We can start fresh. I'll be better. I shook my head. Better isn't enough anymore. I need truth, loyalty, and presence, not promises after betrayal. She pleaded, don't walk away, not like this. I said, walking away is the only honest choice left. Her hands shook. I can't lose you again. I replied, you already did, and now I choose me. I remembered the nights I spent broken, replaying her laughter with Ryan, replaying all the lies. I said softly, I won't live in that shadow again. I won't let someone else decide my happiness. She cried openly now. I thought I could fix this. I said, you fixed nothing. Life fixed itself by teaching me to survive. She whispered, so you don't love me anymore? I replied, love isn't the issue. Trust is. And trust died long ago. Her tears fell freely. I wanted to reach out, not to her, but to the old version of myself who believed. I whispered, I'm letting go. She asked, does it hurt? I said, yes, but it doesn't destroy me. We stood in silence. The air felt heavy with everything unsaid. She whispered, will I ever see you again? I replied, maybe. Not as before. Not as the same us. She nodded slowly. I deserved that. I said, we all get what we deserve. I turned to leave. She called softly, goodbye. I didn't look back. I walked past her, feeling the weight of the past lift with every step. Her sobs faded behind me. I whispered to myself, I survived her, her lies, her return. And now I move forward. I felt empty, yet steady. Pain lingered, but it no longer ruled me. Letting go didn't feel like losing anymore. It felt like reclaiming. And for the first time in years, I walked into the future without looking back. I sat at my desk, staring out the window. The city moved, unaware of my past, unaware of Emily, unaware of Ryan. I whispered, time finally moves, and for me. Sophia walked in. She said, still thinking too much? I replied, always. She smiled. You've changed. I asked, how do you see that? She said, you carry yourself differently, not broken, not bitter, just you. I chuckled lightly. You make it sound easy. She said, it isn't, but you survived. I nodded. I did, and I'm still surviving. We walked along the quiet streets later. She asked, do you think about her often? I said, not like I used to. Memories come, but they don't hurt. She whispered, I'm glad. I said, I've learned something important. She asked, what? I replied, healing isn't forgetting. It's choosing yourself. Choosing your peace. She smiled softly. That's beautiful. We paused by a fountain. She said, so you're open, but careful. I nodded. I want honesty. I want presence. I won't fall blindly anymore. She whispered, I understand. And I'll meet you there. I remembered all the nights I spent broken, all the betrayal, the lies, the silent suffering. I whispered to myself, I survived without revenge, without rage, without begging. Sophia asked, does it scare you? Letting someone close again? I said, yes. But it scares me more to close off completely. She said, then you're ready. I replied, I hope so. I'm willing to try. The wind moved softly around us. I said, time doesn't heal, I do. Slowly, day by day. She nodded. I'll be patient. I smiled faintly. That's all I need. At lunch later, she asked, do you miss the past? I said, not the pain, not the lies. Maybe the person I thought I loved. She said, and now? I replied, now I know myself. That's enough. Mark called that evening. He said, you seem lighter. I replied, I am. I carry the past, but it doesn't weigh me down. He said, good. That's what I wanted for you. I whispered, thank you. I went home, quiet apartment, calm mind. I whispered, I survived betrayal. I survived heartbreak. I survived myself. Sophia texted me later. Thinking of you. I replied, thinking of us. I realized something in that small exchange. The past no longer dictated my heartbeat. It didn't demand my attention. It didn't rule my choices. I whispered, I'm choosing now. Choosing life. Choosing peace. Sophia called. She said, walk with me? I replied, yes. As we walked, I felt the weight lift entirely. No vengeance. No longing. No old scars demanding attention. Just present, just quiet, just alive. I said softly, time moves. Not for them, not for what I lost, but for me. She smiled. And you're ready for it? I nodded. Yes. On my terms. We continued walking. I realized healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about standing in the moment, choosing yourself again, and letting time flow around you without fear. I whispered one last time, I survived, I grew, and now I live. Fully. Honestly. Free. Sophia squeezed my hand. I looked ahead. Time finally moved again.